Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. I am so excited to introduce you to James Hunter. He was a Marine Corps sergeant, combat veteran, and pirate hunter. You're going to love this book. Hi, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about the book and just to talk about everything. It seems like it's going to be a fun interview.
Definitely. All right. So tell me, pirate hunter? Seriously? What's that about?
Yeah. So it's like a super minor tagline to history. So I went into the Marine Corps in 2005, and I did a whole bunch of different things. I was part of a sort of special operations group. I was a heavy machine gunner in Iraq for a while. I worked in Jordan, training the Jordanian Royal Marine Corps, and then in late 2008 into 2009, I was combined with this group called CTF 151, which is like an international combined task force of people that hunt pirates. And so we were the flagship. I was on the USS Boxer, and we worked with a bunch of different folks off the coast of Africa, and we were in Djibouti at the time. But so we have like this very minor footnote to history. So when Captain Phillips was kidnapped by the Somali pirates, our task force was the one that was responsible for saving him. So that's like, again, very minor footnote, but yes, technically I qualify as a bona fide pirate hunter. So I just kind of put it in there for laughs, but it's kind of an interesting thing that occasionally comes up.
Definitely. I think it all comes up in the way that the whole storyline in this book came out, which is really fabulous, by the way. I'm not a huge gamer. So this book really helped me understand the characteristics of the game, like acquiring all the points, and from the view of being inside the game doing it, that was totally key. It made me want to play more video games.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of the attraction of the genre, because it's a genre that's called gamelit, and it's really sort of modern day Portal fantasy is what it is. But instead of going into a wardrobe and ending up in Narnia, you sort of go into this deep dive capsule and you end up in this fantastical world. So I really like the idea of Portal fantasy. I always think that that's a fun trope to play with. But now that like the world has changed and there's all this crazy technology that exists, you can kind of mash up sci-fi and fantasy in interesting new ways and do things with Portal fantasy that you've never really seen before. So I think that's kind of a cool time to be a writer, because there's so many cool things and so many cool inspirations to draw from.
Definitely. I think the fighting, knowing a little bit about your background, the fighting that takes place is really well done. The landscapes, you can tell that they're from many different places in the world. So it's an incredible journey. How did you really come up with the concept? And I love the being able to see, how many points you've gained just by being alive in this world.
Yeah. So I originally started writing, and I wrote a number of books in urban fantasy, and I sort of stumbled upon the gamelit genre. And I had always been kind of not like a hardcore gamer or anything, but I kind of stumbled into it, and I thought, man, this is a really great thing, because I'd always wanted to write epic fantasy, but epic fantasy is, especially for a newer author, can be really hard to write because there's so much research that goes into it and such an expansive world. But this was kind of the perfect fit for me, because it was like I got to marry epic fantasy and urban fantasy, because the characters, at least the characters who travel into the game, are sort of modern people, and they speak in modern ways with slang, and they can reference things that most people know. And so it kind of gave me the best of both worlds. As for the concept, I really like playing around with the dystopian sci-fi stuff. shows like Black Mirror really cool. And so I kind of just had this idea of like, okay, there's this cataclysmic impending event that's going to wipe out a big chunk of humanity. And in this world, this technology exists for people to digitize themselves, but the only server big enough to hold them all is this giant video game server. And what would the fallout of that be? How would that look? How would that change? And so I kind of just ran with that idea initially. And then as I explored it a little bit more deeply, I thought, well, as much as things change, they are also going to stay the same. And so I thought, there's going to be people who are going to want to, sort of, especially the rich and the ultra rich and the powerful, they're not going to like a system that's designed for everyone to sort of start on the same footing. They're going to want a decided advantage. And so that becomes sort of the core plot that a lot of the novel revolves around, is sort of these oligarchs and these super rich people sort of gaming the system in this pay to play fashion so that they can be better than everybody else, just like they always kind of were in real life. And so kind of the main character is this down on your luck EMT who's like, who stumbles across this plot because a college friend of his who was involved in the construction of the game sort of stumbles upon this plot. And then it's them kind of working to undermine this system, and while also doing all of the best parts of a video game campaign, and doing dungeon dives and killing monsters and getting cool loot and doing all that stuff. So I think it kind of appeals to the epic fantasy readers, but also like the gamer nerds that are out there.
Yeah, and knowing your background now, I mean, you're like a tough guy. How did you get into writing stories? Like, I imagine even as a tough guy, you were probably amazing at sharing stories with your friends and picking up morale. But actually writing it for the masses?
Yeah, I like telling stories. I was never really a writer much in high school. I didn't actually start writing until my first deployment. I was in Iraq, and I kind of stumbled upon the Dresden Files, which is a sort of tough guy action adventure, shoot 'em up urban fantasy series of books. And I had read through a bunch of those, and it was like an eye-opening experience. But then I had run out of books to read, and I had my computer, and so I started like playing around with short stories kind of for the first time. I never thought that I would be like an author as a profession. So I kind of wrote on and off in the Marine Corps, and then I kind of fell out of the habit until my wife and I moved internationally to Bangkok. We went and lived there for 2 years as mission and international aid workers with our daughter. And so we were living in Bangkok at the time. This was late 2013. And Thailand is a partially restricted country, so a lot of the things that I would do to like waste time back in the States, like hop on Netflix or go stream Amazon Prime or play video games, I couldn't do there. And so I sort of had this abundant free time all of a sudden. And so I kind of was like, oh, I'm going to go back and I'm going to start writing again. And I don't know, it just was like a bug, and it just caught me. And I pretty quickly turned out my first book, which was an urban fantasy novel entitled Strange Magic, which I ended up publishing. And I never really thought it was going to do anything. I built a marketing plan, and I got cover art, and I got it edited, but it was just kind of a hobby for me. And then it kind of took off, and I started getting emails from people like, where's the next book? And I was like, well, that's a good question. I didn't think that there would be one, because this was not a thing I was going to do as a profession. But then I kind of dived back into that, and I started writing more, and we were getting good traction. And then very suddenly we had to move back to the States. My wife's dad got sick, and we had to come back to take care of him. And so we sort of moved internationally. And the result of that was that the agency that we were left with, that we were with, let us go very suddenly. And so we're like moving internationally with a toddler, and she was 6 months pregnant. And now we're suddenly like kind of like international homeless, like jobless hobos. And I was like, well, lots of poor life decisions culminating together at one time. What are we going to do? And I was like, well, this writing thing is like, it's still going pretty well. I guess we could kind of double down on that and try not to be hobos living under a bridge. And she was like, I like not being a hobo, so let's do that. And then we just kind of dove into it. She came on board full time to help with the marketing side of things, and we've been doing it ever since. So it's been a wild ride, one that I would not have seen coming, but one that I've enjoyed immensely.
That's great. How many books have you published, and how long has this career been going on?
So I've been writing for about 5 years. I've been doing it full time in a professional capacity for about 4 years, and I have written 23 books in that time.
20.
So yeah, 23 full length novels. I have a couple of novellas floating out there too, but I usually kind of don't count them because they're little itty bitty guys.
Wow. Can you elaborate a little more on how your personal history plays into these novels?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of a writer's axiom that goes write what you know, and so I think I have really leaned into that. And so my first series, which was urban fantasy, the main character was kind of this like disgruntled war vet. He was older than I was. He was a Vietnam guy, but there were a lot of similarities and a lot of overlaps. He was a blues musician. He kind of travels around the country living out of an El Camino and killing monsters when he's not playing blues music for beer money. Um, and a lot of that really drew on that experience. I wrote that series while I was living in Thailand and in Bangkok. And for folks who haven't been to Bangkok before, it's just this massive, crazy city of 14 million people. The population density is just everyone's on top of each other all the time. It's just neon and traffic, and it's just craziness everywhere. And so I was going through a lot of culture shock when we were living there, sort of adjusting to this crazy place that was just rich and vibrant and amazing. And so in the Lazarus series, especially, there's this big sort of supernatural city called the Hub, which sort of connects all dimensions together, and all mythologies sort of exist, and they converge in the Hub, and then they'll go to Earth. And the Hub is just basically this giant supernatural version of Bangkok. And so if you read through that book, a lot of the places that he navigates are places that I was in Bangkok, like going down this little back alley that I had discovered and seeing all of these things. And so a lot of that makes it in. And then in the VGO books, a lot of my military experience sort of comes to bear in a lot of the action and the combat oriented stuff. The Merc Elves, since you've read the first book, they sort of live in this sort of swampy place that's called the Storm Marshes, and they live in these weird tree houses that are up on these giant stilts, and all of that pulls directly from the northern hill tribes of Thailand. We spent some time working there, and then with the Isan. And so a lot of the stuff that we did while we were living overseas sort of incorporated into the book and sort of fleshed out a lot of the culture and a lot of the landscape and a lot of the mythology of all of the books that I write.
That's amazing. I really could see it in this book. A lot of places started to look familiar. The way that you talked about different politics in different countries and how they play into the storyline here was good. What was really unique that I haven't seen in any fantasy novel yet was the way that your characters are able to categorize their strengths and achievements. You know, like that whole board that would come up when you're playing a video game, but it's coming up in your head and like, what can I use from what I've done or learned so far or gathered? That was cool because it must,
Yeah.
it's like that flash situation when you're traveling and, you know, what can I use to get out of this situation? Which I imagine is the same thing that you have in combat, you know, where it's that quick, fast thinking and, you know, what has my training done to bring me here?
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that people find really appealing about the gamelet and the like those types of books. And there are not a lot of them out there, but I think that it's starting to get a little bit more steam and get a little bit more traction because there are a lot of people that really love games and really love that aspect of things. But I think that like the skill trees and being able to sort of quantify your abilities, I think that that's a really appealing feature for a lot of readers because, like I will say up front, like my books are not like high literary. Like I write fun action adventure stories that are like they have some themes, but they're kind of just fun escapism. And I think that in real life, a lot of people feel like life is a little bit stagnant and it's really hard. Like you feel like you're just going through the motions all the time, and it's really easy to feel like you're not ever making any progress. And so I think that what has been so appealing to readers is they go to this place where everything that they do, they can sort of tangibly track their actions, and they can say, wow, I'm actually getting better at a thing. And this is going to help me in sort of appreciable ways. And it also is kind of an interesting magic system. So in this case, like the technology sort of replaces the magic system. And even though superficially it looks like magic, it's this giant video game doing all of the heavy lifting in the background. And so I kind of approach that and sort of the leveling up and the character progression, all of that stuff as sort of the magic system. And so it replaces it. I would classify it as sort of like this hard magic system that has these very definitive rules. And I think that people enjoy that too. They like knowing how things work, and they like seeing, oh, it's not hand wavy and like, you just wave the wand and everything fixes itself. It has sort of these tangible, like, oh, these are the boundaries. This is how the magic works. This is how people can level up. And I think that people like going through that journey because it gives them a sense of satisfaction that they're moving somewhere and that they're progressing in a meaningful way.
Definitely. I think that combined with the tangible tracking program, makes people think about, people read to escape. And when you're reading something like this story and you just escape into this whole other world, the way that you've written it, it actually helps you to like take stock of what's going on and different ways to think about it and get around it. And how can I work together with these other people? Those are really strong themes. Like really impressive.
Thank you. That really means a lot. My, some writers really, really care about theme, and I do as well. My number one goal, after 23 books, my number one goal is always I just want to entertain people, and I want them to be a little bit happier than they were when they left my book. But at the same time, it's always nice to work in, some of those themes and some of those elements that are important to you. I think a theme that comes up in sort of all of my books is what happens with like power dynamics, like who has power, who doesn't have power. When you get power, how does that change you? And so I think that that's a theme, both in my urban fantasy and in this particular series, because the main character in this series, Viridian Gate Online, Jack, who's kind of he's a good guy, but he's just nobody, right? He's just an EMT like everybody else who kind of stumbled upon this big conspiracy. And then it's kind of his journey, like, well, it just so happens that I found myself in a situation where I have power that nobody else has, and I have the ability to stop something really bad. And how is that going to change me? What choices would I make? And so I kind of like exploring those themes a little bit too. Although at the end of the day, it's really about just making people smile. I work with a team of authors because the Viridian Gate Online book, so that series that I write has 6 books currently, and I'm working on the 7th book in that series. But we also have this sort of big expanded universe because it's like Viridian Gate Online is an MMO, right? It's designed to have lots of people playing at the same time. And so we have a number of other writers who also write inside the universe. So we have 9 other books currently out in the expanded universe with 4 other authors who have different characters, who have different perspectives, who have different classes. And so they're all sort of standalone series set in the same universe. And whenever I'm working with them, I tell them, we're writing Marvel movies, not DC movies, right? Like they can have themes, they can be meaningful, but we also want them to be funny and fun, and for people to enjoy themselves and walk away from that reading experience feeling a little bit better, but better about the world, about themselves, just happier in general. So that's always kind of our driving goal.
Well, you definitely meet that goal.
That's good. I'm glad. Then I have accomplished my mission.
There you go. But how do you come up with the magic rules for the game?
Yeah,
it's the game and a story, but it actually feels like you're in the game. You're plotting with other characters. It was so much fun to read.
That makes me happy to hear, and I'm really glad. I think the idea piece of it, it's a question I get a lot. I kind of do the convention circuit, and so I'll do a lot of writing panels and stuff. And that's a question that comes up a lot. The ideas and how to, and for me, that's the easiest part. Like I have just a notebook filled with more stories and more ideas than I will ever be able to write in a lifetime. I imagine even writing 5 or 6 or 7 books a year, I imagine it's just more stories than I'll ever be able to get to. So I think that's the easiest part for me. I think that it becomes a little bit more difficult when you really start to buckle down and you start to sort of craft the world in the background and the magic system and how does it actually work and what are the checks and balances. And so that was a big part of writing the VGO books initially. Was I spent probably a month of just really like world building. I have a lot of spreadsheets. I'm sort of ashamed to say, especially for the VGO books, because you have to sort of track all of these. How do these spells work? And how he gets gear, and that affects his characteristic abilities and all of these things. So I have and an unhealthy probably amount of spreadsheets, sort of tracking the progression of all of these people and how all of this magic works. And we have a guy on our team we call him the Viridian Gate Online lore master, and he just like has a giant Bible of all of the different spells and all of the different things from all of the different series that we have. And so that is kind of an interesting dynamic as well, working with these other authors in this universe. They're writing books that, even if they're not directly focused on the central plot line of the main series, like all of the stuff they build is kind of like part of the world. And so you have to kind of respect, like, oh, what did Jess in her Firebrand series do in this city? What world building did she do? How do I have to incorporate that in my book if I go to the same city? And so that adds kind of an additional layer of nuance. But I also think having all of those extra books makes the world so much deeper and so much more vibrant, because you have all of these different author voices, you have all of these different character perspectives, all of these places that you never see in the main series, and they get kind of fleshed out. And so it just feels like this is a real place. I could visit this place. Like this doesn't exist yet, but this could exist.
Oh, it definitely feels like it could exist. That was really well done. And yet now you can see how the team building comes into play and how people partner up that weren't likely to partner up before.
Right. Absolutely.
So what's next on so two questions. How long does it take you to write a book if you're writing 5 to 7 a year? And what's in store for the future?
So I have actually sort of streamlined my process, and now from sort of start to finish with an edited book, it takes me about 6 weeks to write a book. So that's with the edit. So by the time that I'm done, it's gone through 3 different editors, and it's pretty much ready to go. So I do a really thorough outline, and that really helps. My outlines are pretty beefy, and so I do a lot of my developmental editing in the outline phase as opposed to the actual finished book phase, because then instead of having to like edit 10,000 words, I can just edit a paragraph here and a paragraph there, and then I just kind of have the skeleton of the story, and then I put the meat on it. And so it takes me about 6 weeks. I write in chunks, so I usually write a quarter of a book at a time, and then when I'm done with a quarter, that quarter goes into the editing sort of process, and it'll go through multiple rounds of editors while I'm writing the next quarter of the book. And then when I'm all done, I just can kind of like slap it together. I assembly line my book, and it goes out to the beta readers, and it's ready to go. So it usually takes me about 6 weeks to write a book. I feel like I've topped out max speed on that. I try to improve my process to write faster, but that's kind of, I've hit the wall there at 6 weeks. And then in terms of what's
6 weeks
next,
is incredible. What are you kidding me?
but we have guys on our team, because my wife and I also run a small publishing company called Shadow Alley Press that has 10 other authors aside from me. And like we have 2 team members who consistently write, and these are good books, full-length books, every 3 weeks, like clockwork. Every 3 weeks, 90,000 words every 3 weeks. And they go through multiple rounds of editing. They're incredible stories, and these guys they're machines. They're like word machines. I don't know what they can literally have no other life, I imagine. I mean, they just must wake up and roll out of bed into their chair and then just like type until they collapse. I can't imagine any other way, but they do it. We have a guy named Aaron on our team who's written, I think, 15 books in 15 months, and he just machine. So anyways, yeah, so I have something to aspire to. But in terms of what's next for me, I just finished a book with a friend of mine named Dakota Kraut. It's also sort of a gamelit book. It's called Bibliomancer. And the main character is sort of this plucky college kid who winds up in over his head in a feud with sort of this mages guild. And he stumbles upon sort of a secret artifact, and his powers are all based on books. So he can... I don't want to give a lot of spoilers, but it's fun. It's a really fun book. It's up for pre-order now. I think it comes out September 17th. And then in the meantime, I'm working on Viridian Gate Online 7. And then after that, we'll just kind of have to wait and see. We are ramping up. We're going to be at Dragon Con in Atlanta here in just a couple of weeks, so we're pretty excited about that. And then we have a number of other sort of conventions for the latter part of this year. But other than that, it's just writing and having a great time doing it.
Oh, that's great. How many are going to be total for Viridian Gate Online?
So the main series is I have 8 books planned. So I'm working on book 7, which is leading up into the events, and then book 8 is sort of already outlined. So I hope to get that out in the beginning of next year, Viridian Gate 8. So book 7 should come out this year, and then book 8 will come out early next year.
Oh, that's great. So we don't have to wait too long for the next book.
That's also one of the benefits of writing really fast, is that you don't have to wait a year between books. Just give it a couple months and you're going to have another one.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much about what you do and how you craft your stories. It's an amazing adventure, just like your life.
I really thank you.
No, it's so much fun. What advice do you have for young authors getting into the field?
For anyone who wants to get into it, I would say a couple of things. One, most writing advice is kind of garbage, because there's a lot of people that tout there's only one way to do it. There's not one way to do it. There are 1,000 ways to get up this mountain that's called publishing, and do what works for you. If I was going to give any advice that I think is absolute, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. You can't talk about writing. You can't think about writing. You actually just have to sit down, button chair, words on page. So write. Make a habit of writing every day if you can, and finish what you start. There's a lot of writers, they get 10% into a book, it's all bright and shiny and new, and then they immediately give up because it hits a roadblock and they go on to something else. So if you're going to start something, finish it, because that's going to give you the skill set that you need to go on and do bigger and better things. So write a lot, write every day, finish what you start is the best possible advice I can give.
Excellent advice. Thank you again for joining us. And until next time, if you guys want a really great book to read that's action-packed, fast, and a ton of fun, Viridian Gate Online is it. Thank you.